Now Trump said, all right, I don't really like the Ninth Circuit. He hasn't fared super well here. And the Second Circuit's better, but I'm not sure how much better. And so he wanted to go straight to the Supreme Court and was like, you know what, all you immigrant advocates, please, go to the Ninth Circuit, and I'm done with that place. I want the Supreme Court to take this without even waiting for a decision from the Ninth Circuit. The Supreme Court said no, like there's nothing special about this or you right now. You have to go through the normal appellate procedure, and we want the circuit courts in both of these cases to make a decision. And so that's continuing to move forward, and while that happens, the DACA program remains partially in place so that the administration has to receive renewals on an ongoing basis. And I encourage at this point anybody and everybody to renew. Like, I don't care if yours is not gonna expire for another 18 months. I think it's a good time to renew, because if you're gonna tack on another 6+ months after your current expiration date right now. And we have no idea when this whole thing is gonna evaporate into the mist. So I think the benefit of we're talking about like trying to salvage, things out of like a bonfire here. But like the one sort of benefit of the way that this was working before is it gave kind of a clear period of time in terms of eligibility. Now it's great in that has not stopped. At the same time, we have no idea when it will. And so there's really no predictability in terms of the ongoing status and ability of people to kind of maintain their work authorization, maintain their lawful presence in the United States right now.
Is there a fee to renew?
Oh, yes. So it's $500 to renew, and it's pretty much impossible to get it waived. There are other fees that are easier in immigration to get it waived. One thing that I think is always like an important thing to note, so the agency that processes all like the immigration applications, so green cards, naturalization, the whole slew of stuff that you can apply for, there's fees for all of those, and some of them are eligible for waivers, but a lot of them aren't. They are I think they're the only agency in the federal government that produces a profit. So, they are an entirely self-sustaining agency off of fees.
I didn't quite understand, when you were talking about people leaving the country and coming back in, how does that improve their chances for getting a green card?
Yeah, so most people who are eligible, who have DACA, okay, most people crossed without inspection on the southern border. They were brought through by their parents. People also qualify for DACA if they came in on a tourist visa and didn't leave, for example, but that's not the case for most individuals. Most of them came through without any immigration officer ever seeing them, and letting them in. When that is the case, when you have not been inspected at the border, you cannot get a green card from inside the United States. Doesn't matter who you're married to, or who your parents are, or who your kids are, and it doesn't matter what your criminal history is or anything else about you. You have to be inspected at the border in order to be able to get a green card from inside the US. And so people, DACA folks who were then later traveling with permission from the federal government based on their DACA status and were getting inspected when they came back into the country, suddenly switched from the never will you get a green card here to the yeah, sure, you're eligible status. And that was sort of something that some immigration attorneys were like, quick, like let's get you that travel permission, like go to Canada, come back in a couple weeks, like great. But that's a risky thing too to do sometimes in terms of leaving and being re-inspected at the border. So wasn't without risk, but for those folks who did it during the 6 years that this was around, or 5 years that this was around, did often get benefits from that.
Why should the Attorney General want it?
Well, I will do my best.
To,
right, I will do my best to. He actually spoke at a forum held at UI at the law school in Boise. And it was a pretty contentious panel on DACA because there were folks who were very active DACA recipients on the panel with him along with immigration attorneys. And I, credit him for coming to answer exactly those questions, knowing it was probably not going to be the most friendly of audiences. But he basically took the position that that DACA was an overreach of executive power, that it went too far in providing a benefit to too many. And there's, there was a lawsuit in the Fifth Circuit, which is a very sort of not favorable jurisdiction for immigration, that challenged some of Obama's other initiatives, not DACA, but attempts to expand that and include the parents of DACA recipients. And the Fifth Circuit ruled against the Obama administration and said, you're doing too much, you're going too far, there's not authorization for the executive to take these actions. Based on sort of that decision, which didn't really include DACA, these attorney generals said, well, the DACA program's illegal as well. And that was ultimately what the Trump administration said. We're like, well, we see this other decision, we think the same reasoning applies. The problem with that, which is why these courts said, no, you're not right, is that it's different in terms of the legal process and requirements to provide something versus to take it away. And so once the Trump administration was actually taking away work authorization and lawful presence, the court said you have to go through a more formal process to do that. Because you are significantly changing folks' ability to stay in their jobs, stay in their school, do all these things that they've been able to do now for 5 years. But that was, if you ask Attorney General Watson about it, he's absolutely a proponent of a congressional program through formal legislation to provide status for this group of people. He just doesn't think that it is proper as a matter of a presidential decision to do. And he thinks that the reasoning that applied to this other much larger program also applies to DACA. And I think, 2 judges have said that's pretty debatable and not gone that way. Okay, so here's the battles in Congress. This is outside Paul Ryan's office, I think around the shutdown. So you had a DACA-related shutdown in January of 2018, where the Democrats were saying we will not fund the government until you give us DACA. That ended 3 days later with a promise to debate DACA, which ended like a month later in a failure all around. And so there were 4 different bills that went through in 1 week in February. It was actually the day that Luis Cortez was with us. All of them failed on that day. But none, to your question earlier, none were a Clean Dream Act. They were all tied to a border wall funding, to elimination of the diversity lottery, which is for underrepresented, largely African countries. Reductions by up to 40% of all our current other immigration channels. And so there hasn't been an actual vote on the DREAM Act just as a standalone piece of immigration law. And again, because this was so much in the sort of public view, there were tons of polls in January and February about this, and they were consistent in 80% of Americans supporting that kind of legislation. But when you combined it with billions of dollars for a wall, a reduction in a bunch of other forms of immigration, there was never any coalition that got it through the Senate. So I think the closest was a bipartisan bill that sort of did less, that reduced the immigration less than what President Trump wanted, but it still failed by 6 votes. And so, I was looking around this morning, I was like, yeah, I hadn't heard anything since February 15th when all of those were voted down. And the answer is that there really is an active discussion right now. And part of it, I think, is because, for better or worse, those court cases, those court orders that are allowing people to renew, have removed some pressure from Congress to sort of fix this once and for all. And that's a problem because those court orders are limited. It doesn't reach everybody. And even DACA alone only reaches about 1/3 of the people that would be eligible for actual, legislation, a real law. And, so it's a bit of a double-edged sword in terms of those court orders. And the Trump administration actively did not challenge those temporary orders requiring it to receive the renewal applications. And I think that was strategic because it was clear that that was going to remove the pressure, and then what would have come would have been pictures on March 6th of every single person who lost DACA that day. And those pictures don't exist anymore because they never came into being because of those court orders. So you don't have a sense of what the true losses are. But it's much harder to find people who want to renew because you don't have the same kind of guarantees that the Trump administration is going to protect the information in those applications. And you have this, as I was saying before, these policy priorities to prosecute parents. And so it becomes a much riskier prospect for people without the same kind of pinpointed date where, person after person was going to lose their status, which might have sort of helped push this over the edge in Congress. So I think it's really hard to know how this is going to, proceed into sort of some kind of critical mass to get that legislation moving forward. And it may be that some court, either the Ninth Circuit or the Second Circuit, says, we think that the Trump administration can stop DACA. And then that will start, I think, a new wave of urgency about fixing this in Congress. I think that's it. All right. More questions?